first incidents was my stepmum. She'd been ill for a while, and they said they thought they suspected she had cancer, and this was on the Friday, and I got a phone call from my dad the following Wednesday, and she was in hospital and she was dying, and they said that there's just no time. She was my dad's carer. So I had to drop everything and go out. The shock of this happening with no warning was quite horrific, and especially for my dad. My brother lived in Wales in Brecon Beacons, and he came down as well. My dad couldn't look after himself. Jan was his carer, so my brother and myself took care of my dad. Every 2 days we got to see him. I made him a makeshift commode and everything around him that he could eat and drink. And then 2 weeks after Jan died, my brother had a massive heart attack and died within an hour of the first signs. He was super fit. The shock of Stephen dying was just unbelievable. So whilst fighting the grief of Jan and then my brother, I had to tell my dad. My dad absolutely fell apart, whereas everybody else had people around them. I had to keep working, had to keep driving backwards and forwards, looking after my dad, keep fighting social services. It was a 2-hour drive from my house to my dad's. Sometimes he'd phone me up in the early hours. He'd had an accident, he couldn't get to the commode, and I would drive. I'd be there at 3 o'clock in the morning, and my shift at work would be at 7. And this went on for a further 8 weeks. And then I found my dad dead on the commode. I wasn't the one that actually initially found him. The neighbour had got concerned and called the police in an ambulance, or called the police and said they broke in and they found my dad. And when I drove up, they just all stood in the doorway and wouldn't let me in, and I, being me, went through them. There was 6 of them, and I just sort of went through and over them, and I fell into my dad's living room, face to face with my dad dead. The guilt of, because I'd not seen him for 3 days, because I kept nearly crashing my car, driving backwards and forwards. I was exhausted. It was just horrendous. I don't remember that day very well. And I drove home the following day. My son called my daughter. He was terrified. He'd woke up and I was walking around the kitchen talking to myself and hitting my head, scratching my arms and just talking absolute nonsense. And my doctor straight away said she's got PTSD. I was absolutely scratching my head and hitting my head. If I was, not all the time though, because sometimes, I'd be absolutely fine. I'd go to Asda, the poor old people in Asda, and somebody'd walk past and he wouldn't even look like my dad, but there'd be something about him, and all of a sudden I'd just be standing there rocking and hitting myself, and people walking around thinking, what on earth's going on? But they were brilliant, because after about the 3rd time, they used to just the customer service used to just come and get me and take me to a quiet bit, take my phone and phone my daughter. And my daughter would talk to me whilst she's got a hands-free phone, I might add, and she would be talking to me whilst driving from Verwood to Bournemouth to come and get me and to see that I was okay. And silly things would trigger it off. Febreze, I couldn't bear the smell of Febreze, because that's what the undertakers used to clear the smell of my dad's living room. So every time I smelt this, the same reaction without absolutely any warning. And this normally happened in the supermarket, so I stuck to the same supermarket just because they knew what this would happen. And also I developed this horrendous stutter. I couldn't get anything out, and I was sent to Steps to Wellbeing to Jeannie here in Bournemouth. My little sister had told me that she'd had EMDR treatment through a car accident, which was horrendous for her. She said, it seems really weird. You'll sit there and just think what a load of nonsense this is. But she said, give it a chance. It really did work for her. So this is what I did. When I first saw Jeannie, my very first session with Jeannie, we only talked about when I got out of the car to when I actually saw my dad, I vomited. She got the bin in front of me straight away. It was just absolutely, it was horrific going through it. And each time, for the first few times that we did this, I thought, I can't come back, I can't come back. And it was about the 5th or 6th session, I actually started looking forward to coming, because I did feel she was getting things straight in my head, and my stuttering, for some strange reason, right from the start, didn't happen when I was with Jeannie. I could speak to her, and she'd just sort of stop me, think of a colour, think of anything. And she used to get, I never even knew I had a happy place, but I have a happy place, which is my greenhouse with my grandchildren. And she would just get me there. When I got too upset, she'd just stop it. And it was no longer traumatic. I actually looked forward to coming, because I knew each and every time that I saw her, the stuttering had almost stopped outside of coming to the Steps to Wellbeing as well. And it was about sort of week 6 or 7, and I thought, wow, this really does help. The EDMR treatment that I had on a weekly basis, and although we keep going over the same thing, you get stopped just before things get too stressful, and then the EMDR treatment, Jeannie comes in with the treatment and deals with that specific thing, and it's like getting all the confused bits in your head all in the right pockets of the brain. It doesn't stop your grief, but what it does do is it stops you getting everything mixed up. Your grief is one thing, the horror that I went through was another thing. It wasn't my fault. I did everything I could do, but there was just such an overload. And I really did think I'd gone crazy. I really did. I used to argue with myself that I had gone crazy. No, you haven't. Yes, I have. But it really was strange, and hurting myself seemed quite normal at the time, because it was a way of, it hurt, so it sort of snapped something in my head that I am still here, because it was the strangest, weirdest thing to ever experience for a strong-minded person to come to terms with what had happened. But the EMDR treatment on a weekly basis, I could have had more if I needed it. I could have, as we got towards the end of it, Jeannie cut my treatments down to once a fortnight. And on the very last one, she was so pleased that I'd recovered, but I still was quite nervous about the thought of not coming back. What if something happens? So she booked me in for a follow-up 1 month afterwards, which actually coincided with between my brother's anniversary of dying and my dad's anniversary of dying. And I came back, and it was almost like it was a complete waste of time, because I didn't need it. But I know that if I ever need to, I can contact Steps to Wellbeing at any point, and they will pick up where we left off if need be. I can't believe that somebody could just talk you through and help you mentally get right.